In digital forensics, knowing how to write code allows you to create your own forensic tools, test other people's tools, and contribute to the community overall. But among all the learning choices, from books to training courses, sometimes you just prefer to take an informal path. That's where Alexis Brignoni's tutorials come in. A certified digital forensics examiner and researcher based in Florida, Alexis posts regular tutorials to YouTube in both English and Spanish and runs a concurrent study group on the DFIR Discord server. We have Alexis with us here today on the Forensic Focus podcast to talk all about it. I'm your host, Krista Miller, and welcome, Alexis.
Thank you so much. I'm happy and honored to be here.
Thank you. So to start with, how did you initially become interested in coding?
Well, it's like anything else, a really long story. But making the story short, so I started in university and college, jumping around different degrees, all the way from theology major, seminary student to education, business administration, different things. I ended up in programming, and actually it was one of the best choices, computer science, best kind of lucky choices I made in my life. And that's where the interest for coding started. So it was a different time back then.
So I actually, I had a question on here about, was Python your first programming language? And it doesn't sound like it was. So tell us a little bit more about your first programming language and how it led you to Python.
Well, I started with Cobalt, and or I used to say in Spanish, Cobalt. And if some of the folks here that have been around, they'll know. And it's kind of interesting because, Cobalt is an old programming language, really structured. And that's where I got my start at the university. And people, you will be surprised how much of our normal day-to-day we need to live infrastructure is built on top of it. It's ridiculous. Like banks use Cobalt by the ton, and there's a bunch of legacy systems that we need as a society that are built on it. So, sometimes we think, oh, the latest and greatest, but sometimes it might not be the greatest in a sense, because the things that have a history that have been tested and proven are the ones that remain, right? And Cobalt is, for example, one of those.
Sometimes the old ways are best.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the testing, right? And especially in our field in forensics, it's all about going with what's tested, and if it's not, then test it, right? To make sure you're building on solid ground.
Yeah. And I imagine too, with all of that relevance, that Cobalt is probably not a bad programming language to learn for incident responders or aspiring incident responders.
If you are gonna be looking at these legacy systems, absolutely, and you see talks, in the big conferences, information security conferences, you got folks that do mainframes and work on Cobalt all the time, and it's relevant. You would think it is not. It is extremely relevant. From even penetration testers that specialize in this old, I used to manage back in the day a VAX mainframe I used to work at the college that I graduated from. They hired me right after they graduated me, and one of the things I did was that.
Okay. Yep.
And it's still relevant today. Absolutely.
Cool. So I'm going to move over to Python now, since that's the topic of your tutorial series. So there are different Python, so to speak, subspecies, some of which are specific to some tools. And I'm thinking of Iron Python, and there's a bunch of other, again, subspecies. How did you decide which one to learn first?
Well, this is a great question because it dovetails what we're talking about, right? You would think, well, Python is one of the most popular in-use languages, latest and greatest. Well, Python is, as a general rule, what, 30 years old, almost, more or less.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that old. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, let's not say old, right? Because, it was young like us.
Yeah.
but I say it in the sense that there's a level of testing and of that comes with it. Now, the question is, well, this has been around for a while. Why do we have different variations? And I'll make sure that everybody understands. I don't portray myself as the Python expert, right? As the greatest developer in the universe. I am not, and I did not stay at a Holiday Inn last night either. So what I'm sharing is pretty much my experience and as I do things, right? And well, you see some of the tools that we use, commercial tools, for example, Iron Python. Well, these come with certain functions or libraries or pretty much the parts that make it a thing. They test them in a way that they're interoperable and, in case for Iron Python, in my experience, be really safe from an information security perspective. What that means is that we're going to try to really lock down these libraries, our functions, so somebody can come later and maybe hack our product, right? And we heard, pretty well-known products in the industry. It was a big deal about, oh, look, they're being hacked, right? And that's another conversation for another day. But these programming languages try to put certain limitations. Contrast that with Python that comes out, we're up to 3.9 now. And it's a lot of development, new tools, new ways of doing things.
Sure.
And you have to balance that between a commercial product versus like what I do is non-commercial, is open source, it's free for everybody. And then how do you balance those capabilities with the security of the system and the integrity of the data that you're managing, especially if you're a company that charges pretty penny for it.
Yeah. Okay. So what did you finally land on? Like what's best for the tools that you develop?
So I use kind of pure plain Python. So
Okay.
pretty much I go to the main, python.org, if I'm not mistaken, and I just download the latest version. I try to leverage the newer things as they come out. And the thought process of the tools that I do, and the folks that are not familiar with it, I do a lot of triaging tools, and I make sure to explain their triaging, right? Can you do a full exam with the open source tools that, and I say me, but the community, because a lot of people working with me, that we all make sure you can. But I say triaging because the onus is, and it should be, this is true for everything, should be on the examiner or the person doing on the analyst, right? Even if you're using a paid tool, which you have a certain level of assurance, it's still up to you to make sure that that output is correct and that you're interpreting correctly what the tool is telling you. Okay. So I feel free in using the latest Python things that come out, because at the end of the day, it's not the tool that goes, in my case, I'm a law enforcement. It's not the tool that goes and testifies. It is me that goes and testifies, right? It is me that says, look, this is the work that I did. The tool just gave me a pointer into the right direction. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. So in terms of it sounds like you've been programming obviously for a long time, but in terms of incorporating your coding work into your day job and your family obligations and just life in general, like how do you fit all that in, and what would you suggest to people that are coming new to coding for the first time that are also trying to juggle those different interests?
Well, that's a great question. It's a pretty deep question because it could go. There's a lot to be said. So I'll try to address a few in the time that in the minutes that we have.
Sure.
The first is I want to encourage people to have time for themselves and the things that they want to do outside of work. And you're like, you're not answering the question. Oh, I answered the question. Let me tell you why. This project that I do, I do it majority of the time in my off time, my personal time, unless I have a specific requirement to get at some data source that the commercial tools don't parse. I made the decision of using my own tooling because it's the one that I can develop the fastest, and I do that, right? And then I try to replicate some of that within those paid frameworks for other people, right? And what that means is I do it with my tool first. I got my output quickly. Then I figure out a way to have just a few examples to have a Celebrite or Axiom, Magnet Axiom, or FTK, AD Lab, whatever. Be able to, I put the functionality in those tools and share it with others, right? And we can discuss more about that maybe later. But the point I'm making with that is a lot of that's work is done in my own time, right? And folks are in this field really passionate about what we do, but we shouldn't lose track of work is not life. I mean, life is not work, I should say. And actually, in a sense, work life is part of it, right? But it's not life, right?
Yeah.
So take that into account. I'm lucky because when I have time off, when I take time off, I mean by myself, right? When I'm not dealing with the wife or the kids or doing some activities with the family, I enjoy coding. I think it's fun to have a problem like a puzzle and figure out what the solution is, or to transform something from one state to another, to create with words. And that's one of the things that I like about coding is that your words become actionable, right? What you write, what you think, what you speak, actually it has an impact in the world. It has a literal physical impact. People could go free or could go to jail, based on the words that you put in on this electronic paper, if that makes sense. So please take time for yourself. And as you're learning coding, try to make it part of your work-life balance, right? Because for most of the forensic examiners, the expectation is that, hey, look, we train you, here's some tools, go do some work, right? But when you're adding more stuff like coding and all that, at the beginning, make sure you keep that balance, because it's going to be a challenge. I mean, learning coding, it takes some time. It's an investment of time. Now, that's the good thing about it, is that as you get more proficient at it, then it makes your workflow faster, right? So now you can just say, okay, I'm going to do this, run it. I sit for a little bit of time and I got my output as I need it, as I want it. And in the future, I can repeat that process and automate it. I don't have to do it by hand. I was reading on Twitter, Brett Shavers was saying, well, this person was really proud, some person that he references in his tweet, about how he or she was able to duplicate, I don't know how many ridiculous amount of emails or something like that, right? It took him, the person, 60 hours. And Brett is saying, well, if, or you could ND5 them, hash them, and then just take the duplicates out. And it takes 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? With a little bash script, it's a little coding, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And that poor person spends 60 hours deduplicating things by hand. No, you just code it real quickly and you're done in 2 minutes, which, by the way, I have an actual example of that, of me duplicating BitTorrent files that I eventually ended up with a script that I put in my repo. And some folks that work ICAC cases, Internet Crimes Against Children cases, they use it as part of their workflow.
Oh, great.
Identified relevant BitTorrent hashes and the like. Right? So that's the first part. Keep your work-life balance as you're adding new things that you're learning, and then make them applicable to your job, your workflow, and hopefully enjoy them. I mean, if you enjoy them, it's not going to be work in a sense.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It doesn't sound like the sort of thing that you do just because you think you should. What surprised you, or what has surprised you the most in your coding career?
I guess I don't know if to say surprise, because when you have like a background, like a systematic, or you went to college for computer science, so they teach you data structures and different things in a systematic way, right? So there's not a lot of surprise. I guess, not the word's not surprise, but more of a kind of thinking. My teacher was right. My instructors were right in saying, look, if you learn the underlying concepts, right, of things, then you can apply it to everything, right? And I started coding, like I said, with Cobalt, and then a little bit of C, and then a little C#. And at that point, object-oriented languages were starting, which I still need to work on that. I mean, I know what they are. I used them a little bit, but I'm not an object-oriented programmer, but I'm striving to get there, right? But even with object-oriented programming, which is a different paradigm, in a sense, the concepts underlie are the same. Underlie the whole thing are the same, right? Your data structures and how you reference things, they're the same no matter what language you use. And I guess that's more of a life lesson applicable, is that, look, and in your work, if you have this principle, this ethics, morals, and the integrity of how you do things, that will transmit and show up everywhere in life, even places where you don't expect it. Things that you learn, you can apply them in different scenarios and situations as needed. And coding, to me, is like a microcosm of that life, human experience of, look, you learn these things and then you can apply them in ways that you haven't expected. I started with a few little parsers here and there for random things.
Yeah.
And then Jessica Hyde, used to be with Magnet, now with Exordia. She told me, hey, why do you put them all together in one place? So you can start building and people can use it. And now I have all different versions of my software for different purposes. Folks are contributing, and it's not my software anymore, it's the community software. And I mean, I'm not expected. It's kind of surprising in that way, but the principles remain and they apply at all times. So I think that's a pretty cool thing.
That's I mean, there's kind of an allegory there to digital forensics in general as well, where it's the underlying science of it, no matter whether you're doing a computer or a mobile device or a drone or whatever, right?
Yeah, and I tell the folks that I train and mentor and work and outside of work, um, the process, the underlying concepts are the basis, and we need to follow them because
Mhm.
I was telling them, look, we all have biases. We all have biases, even when we're coding or not coding or working, right?
Mhm.
And I tell them, look, if you tell me that you don't have a bias, then that's a bias, actually. Thinking
Yeah.
that you don't have a
Yeah.
bias.
Yeah.
But the process guarantees that our results and our output, it's free of that bias because
Mhm.
that process doesn't care about what you think. It is what it is,
Mhm. Mhm.
and you
Mhm.
apply that process in your code, in your analysis, in your life. Apply a good process, a good foundation, and the results will take care of themselves.
Yeah. 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 So, kind of on that note, what made you decide to start tutorials?
Well, I love that question because coming from a systematic, university level of learning, a lot of it, and it depends on your instructor, but some of it might be dry, right? Or
Mm.
they take you into this roundabouts, and that might not be applicable to your scenario. And I don't want to ding roundabouts. They're great they have a lot of them in Europe for your cars, but
Yeah. Yeah.
they have a purpose. And yeah,
Right.
there's many things in Python that you can learn for different things. But I was thinking, look, if as an examiner, what do I need to know to be as effective as quickly as possible?
Mhm.
Okay, and it's tough in a sense because there's no book specifically for that. The books that you
Right.
have in for digital forensics, this is my opinion. Nobody else's, not my job. It's my opinion. Some of those books say, okay, they assume you know some Python, and then they tell you, okay, how do you take a Windows log and parse it? Here, how you do it, like a cookbook, right? Or how do you solve this particular problem with Python, and you go from it, right?
Mhm.
But they don't really teach you the thought process behind Python in relation to digital forensics.
Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, and I haven't found a book that I'm satisfied, at least me, yet,
Mm.
that has that process. So, what I did was I took a book that is just a general Python book.
Mhm.
And when the pandemic started, um, you know, folks had to stay home as our workplaces had to figure out how can we do work remotely because not every workplace was built for remote, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do we do that? So a part of that is like, okay, let's do some, have people take advantage of this and do some trainings and do some work from home, and they let us do that. So part of me being at home, part of my work in a sense, was to think, okay, how can we take Python and give it to examiners so they can get to the things they need to examine quicker. So I took this book, not for forensics, just for Python, and I taught this class, or I built this class just for that. So the class is
Okay.
like this. It's fairly straightforward.
Mhm.
We learn the basics of what are the main Python parts, right?
Mhm.
Your arm, your legs, your abdomen, your head, right? So we know what they are, and now we're gonna put them together into a body that's just for forensics. So, for example, I teach in that class. Okay, this is how you open a protobuf file and take
Mm.
stuff out of it so you can
Mhm.
show it to your whoever needs it. How about an XML file? How about binary plist, right? And I teach people how to take meaning out of these data structures.
Mm.
Okay, and I gave a few of the more harder, I say harder, but mostly used, um, but not. Let me rephrase that. Um, Folks that use tools, and the tools are great. Tools have viewers, right? Your
Mhm.
forensic tool will, if you want to see what's inside a Python, I'm sorry, binary plist, the tool will show you. If
Mhm.
you want to see the protobuf, the tool will show you. See the XML? There's like a viewer for that as well. It will show it to you. But what I'm trying to convey to folks is, look, it's great that tool shows you the thing, but that thing may have 100 things inside of it when you only need two. So how can I go and just pull out the two that I need
Mhm.
or the three that I need,
Mhm.
right? And that's where Python comes in, and a little bit of programming. I teach them how to open the file,
Mhm.
analyze it, and figure out, understand what the data structure is, and then pull out what's relevant and make a little report. That's it. And from
Mhm.
in my experience, if you're an examiner, that's what you want to do. You want to take this data that comes in and make it accessible, pull out what you need
Mhm.
and show it, right? There's a lot of nuance into that. How
Yeah.
much to show, how much not to show, how do you make those decisions, etc. But from the point of making the class, as examiners, open the file, get to the data, and pull out what you need and present it. And I
Mhm.
got good feedback from folks in the community telling me, look, I've done a whole bunch of Python classes, and this is the first time that I did a little script that I could actually use
Hmm.
at work. And that just
Ah,
made my day, right? It was, I think it's
yeah.
20 something classes in the whole curriculum, right? And does that come and made those 20 something hours worth it?
Yeah, definitely. Going back to, so you just said something about figuring out like what nuances to bring to the course and you know what to say and what to leave out. Like how do you tell us a little bit more about how you translated your day-to-day work and your knowledge to actually teaching others, because they're not the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, we gotta, and we do. I think most people in the community do. But if you're coming in new and you're listening to this, I would advise you have pride in the work that you do, right, and in the thoroughness of it, because you want to become a subject matter expert of the things that you do on a daily basis, right? And that's what that nuance come in trying to convey to students and in class. But most of the people that I mentor, your experiences will inform you on what's important. Also, the experience of other people that are more, you know, have been in longer than you, and then you can make those decisions, right? If and be able to sustain those decisions, right? You have a data source like a Google Takeout, right? Which I'm kind of working on now. Some of those
Okay.
archives that come from providers. It's gigs and gigs and gigs of data, right? So how can you make a decision of what you need to pull out, but being also honest to the evidence, right? Because the last thing you want to do is say, well, I picked these because it would make the other side look bad.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And that's something that we have to constantly strive to avoid by following the process, right? So you got to become an expert in that and be self-critical in a sense to make sure that you're pulling out, and what you're pulling out is an accurate reflection of what the source data is telling you, because your report is not the data. Your analysis is not the data, right? What your Python coding outputs is not the data. The data is the data, right? The actual source data is what it is, right? And you gotta be true to that. That's why I'm saying there's a lot of nuance, and we may not have time for that, but how do we make those decisions on what to pull, what not to pull, and being honest to ourselves on the data, you know?
Yeah. So what should tutorial attendees expect when they go through your courses?
So when we start with a Zoom, group, and I don't think the students or myself had any preset expectations. We like to learn Python. Let's see what we can learn together, right?
Yeah.
But now that the course is done, I can tell folks, look, this is what you're gonna expect to learn, right? You're gonna with book or notebook, right? Because you don't really need the book that I not recommended, but I said we should use. You can expect to start running a script, at least learn how to run scripts, and have a little video for that. Just explain how to run scripts, because you don't have to be a Python coder to run a Python script, right? So how to run scripts, and then how to start a simple script that will open the file that you care about. It will teach you how to, again, pull out what you need and then show it either on a screen or a little text file, little report documentation that you can attach to your case, and that's it. I mean, and you'll be surprised. Those little, I say little, but those capabilities, it's like a seed, right? You can start with that seed and it becomes a big oak tree. You'll be surprised how much you can do by just opening a file, pulling stuff out, and making a report. Those 3 steps, just by doing that, you can do tons of things.
Wow. Cool. So when you and I first started talking about doing this podcast or interview in general, you had just started to offer the tutorials in Spanish. What was important to you about doing that, to offer this information to native Spanish speakers that might not speak English?
Yeah, so part of the things that I do for work is I train partners overseas, law enforcement partners. And again, this is my experience. It's limited, but my opinion, there's some resources. In Latin America, there's a strong information security community in many countries, many experts. But the law enforcement side, I believe there's not always that communication there between the information sector and the investigators,
Oh,
and there might be some lag there. And other challenges depending on depending on the country and the region and whatnot, right? So I thought, what if I could at least put a little grain of sand, right, to kind of solve this issue in the sense of putting resources out in Spanish that folks could use to solve problems and to bring cases to completion. That's where some of the videos in Spanish come about. For example, Protobuf is a data source that people are really intimidated by.
Oh.
Why
is that?
Well, I would say at least I was intimidated at the beginning, because when you kind of look at it, it makes no you can read some stuff, like you can see words, right? You can see names and things you can read, but then they're encasing something that, what the heck is this? Right? And usually the process was, okay, then take and decode it with a little protalk or whatever it's called, and it gives you another output that has a lot of things that also don't make sense, right? Absent of some context. So what I try to teach folks is, look, don't be intimidated by it. Let me explain how this works, right? And I would remiss if I don't mention Yogesh Khatri. He used to be a professor, university professor. Now he is I forgot his position, but he does great work. He's now lives in Australia and doing fantastic work there in the private sector. And I owe him a lot, because he's the one that really taught me a lot about Protobuf, how it's structured, what it means, right? So what I receive, I try to give to others, right? So I want to thank him for all his kindness towards me. Anyways, back to the thing. So there's no need to be intimidated when you understand something, right? What seems to be hard is not really hard. It's a lot of small, simple things that altogether seem complicated. So if you break it down, we can get to it. And a lot of tools, another thing that I think makes it challenging is because a lot of tools don't have support for it. Right? They have a viewer. I mean, you can see what's that file. This Protobuf file has something in it, but there's no way of within our paid tools to parse it in a way that I can select things and whatnot, right? So I try to teach folks, don't be intimidated by it. This is how you go around it and figure out what you need to figure out. And with practice, it becomes easy.
Okay. Well, that does it, honestly, for my questions. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover?
Well, I want to say like a future looking statement for everybody. Again, as examiners, and we're talking about the DF side of DFIR, right? Digital forensics. We have our tools, we have our workflow and our mission, but I truly believe, looking forward, that coding is going to become even more important to the work that we do. So we can't just rely on just the vendors giving me support for something, because it might take weeks or months, or who knows, right? This coding is going to be important, and something that I'm going to start looking forward is looking at reverse engineering, also as part of my digital forensics work. Mike Williamson, he used to be a Canadian police officer. Now he works at Magnet. He's done great work in trying to make reverse engineering accessible. And the reason for that is you will have apps that you cannot really get to that data unless you understand how the app works on the inside, right? And kind of run that app and kind of peek inside the app as it's running, for you to glean the information you need to crack that data source, to open that treasure or that egg, right? And that's something that I think examiners should start thinking about learning some programming. I recommend Python. Doesn't have to be Python, but something I recommend. And start looking at how can I have some basic reverse engineering skills to add into my skill set. And I think that would be beneficial to everybody.
Can we expect a joint tutorial between you and Mike coming?
Oh my goodness! I would love to sit. Mike is my friend, right? He's a really good friend, so people understand when we talk all the time. But if we live closer, I'll be like, dude, you need to sit with me and teach me over coffee, like every week. He's a good guy, and cool. Keep your eye out for the stuff that he puts. Really important stuff. Looking towards the future.
Very cool. Looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Alexis, thank you again for joining us on the Forensic Focus podcast.
No, thank you for having me. It's
Of
been a blast.
course.
It's been a pleasure.
I'm glad. Thanks also to our listeners. You'll be able to find this recording and transcription along with more articles, information, and forums at www.forensicfocus.com. If there are any topics you'd like us to cover, or if you'd like to suggest someone for us to interview, please let us know.